Brady, we kind of had this conversation back in November when Seattle played here and talking about Russell Wilson. I don't know that a lot has changed since then, but I'm curious, we're several months away where, Russell's name is going to be bandied about because any team that would want a quarterback would be interested in him. What's your take on his situation with Seattle at this point?
Well, John, I think you and I, this may not be the last conversation we're going to have about it, just because I do think that this is going to continue to be a topic of conversation for at least the next couple months, even though ultimately I think I don't know if I could put a percentage on it, but it doesn't seem likely to me that he gets traded. And I think that's for a number of reasons. A very big reason being that it's just not a good draft for quarterbacks at all, as you know. And the massive, the all important question for the Seahawks is, if you're trading Russell Wilson, who's going to play quarterback for you? And, if you're not that there's ever really a good time or a good situation to be moving on from your franchise quarterback, but this is not the year to do it, just because it's not a good draft for quarterbacks at all. So there's other reasons that we could get into, but that's a pretty big one. And so that said, as unlikely as it is for that reason, I don't think it's out of the question. And there was a very interesting comment from Pete Carroll after the season, talking to one of the local TV stations in Seattle, where the question was basically, do you think you can get through an offseason without all of the speculation and the rumors that persisted last offseason? And it was a perfect opportunity for Carroll to squash everything and to say, Russell is our guy, we're not trading him. And he didn't do that at all. And he basically, not in so many words, but he basically said that they're going to listen to trade offers for him. In his own sort of somewhat vague Pete Carroll wording. That was clearly the message that I took from it, is that they will at least listen, because that's what the owner wants them to do. And it's all about making the team better and blah, blah, blah. So I do think that we're going to be in for some of the same rumors and speculation. And I don't think you can rule it out, as unlikely as I think it is.
Why? So my question would be, the guy still can play, right? Why would Seattle want to trade him if he can still play for, if I'm Washington, I'd say I'd like to get him because I think he can play for the next 5 years at a certain level. Why would Seattle want to trade him?
Well, I think,
I not even want, but why? Maybe want might be the wrong word, but maybe why would they?
Why would they? I think there's some thought that, the relationship is, it's strained. I don't think the relationship, at least not right now, from what I've heard, I don't think the relationship is so toxic that it's untenable and that they have to trade him. And that was really the kind of position I was taking in our exercise we did at ESPN.com, where I served as the Seahawks GM and fielded trade offers from you and from other NFL Nation reporters. I mean, I don't think at all it is so toxic that it's just an unworkable situation. But there is some tension there, and that tension really bubbled to the surface last offseason when Wilson said what he said. And so I do wonder if the relationship may have a shelf life. Wilson, I think, has been frustrated for a number of reasons. One being that, he wants to win multiple championships, multiple MVPs. And I think he has wondered if Seattle is the best place for him to do that. I think there's been some frustration on the Seahawks part. Certainly with the way that he came out and said what he said last offseason. And I also wonder if the Seahawks, if they wonder about the long-term viability of continuing to pay quarterbacks at, these massive, massive salaries that, the quarterback market is outpacing, the growth in the salary cap. And so, they're probably next year, if they continue on the current track, Wilson's probably going to get a deal worth $45 million, or he would be in line for that kind of extension. And I think that they have wondered how viable that is to keep paying quarterbacks these massive salaries and have to, skimp elsewhere as you're trying to build a roster around those huge contracts. I mean, they have sort of lived in both of those worlds. Remember, they had Wilson on his, rookie contract as a third-round pick who was making nothing, and they could spend all the money they wanted around him. And that's right. Really how they won their first Super Bowl and got to the next one, is the financial flexibility they had. And now they've been in that other world where they're paying, Wilson as one of the highest paid quarterbacks, and they're really having to make tough decisions around him. So I think there's a number of reasons why I think they would at least consider it.
With Russell, how do you see his game aging? Because I guess that's a question for any team because to get him, you'd have to give up a lot of draft capital and then ultimately cap space. How do you see his game aging?
Well, John, he has talked openly about wanting to play for another, 10 plus years. He's 33 right now. He has very much talked about wanting to do what Tom Brady does, play well into his 40s. And, Wilson, I think, takes care of his body as well as a lot of quarterbacks, better than most quarterbacks do. And, he's got this performance team that he spends. I don't know the exact number on it, but I know that it is a lot of money that he spends on, a team of trainers, massage therapists, movement specialists, yoga, all that. He calls it his performance team. And so he is very much, doing that with an eye towards playing a very long time. As far as how well his game is going to age, I think that's a legitimate question because, unlike Brady, Wilson's game has been more about movement and escapability. And you wonder if, how much the athleticism and how much the escapability is going to wane as he gets, into his late 30s. That hasn't been an issue for Tom Brady because his game was never really built on that. He's always been a pocket guy. And so I think that is a fair question to wonder about, but certainly he has the longevity, I think, to play into his 40s.
Where do you feel his level of play is at right now? Last year, for most of the year, he was in the MVP discussion. And then this year he was doing pretty well, injuries. So where's his level of play right now?
Yeah, that is an interesting one that I think the Seahawks have to, before they do anything, before they start fielding trade offers and before they make any decision there, I think they've really got to take a long look at that. And I think logically, what's most likely is that he had a down season because the finger was giving him trouble even when he came back. And Wilson said when he came back that his finger was fine and he continued to downplay it, even though he was missing throws that you just never see an accurate quarterback like that miss. And it stands to reason that when, the middle finger on your throwing hand, which might be the very last thing that touches the football when it goes out of your hand, he had surgery on that. There was a fracture, dislocation, and a tendon rupture. And so he came back very quickly from that injury. I think some might argue that he came back maybe earlier than he should have. But that's a separate conversation, but he finished the season strong. I think that was an important part of this whole evaluation is that, he was, I think in the first 3 games back, he was in the 20s in terms of total QBR, and you just saw the very odd misfires. And then the next few games, he started to climb back up. And then over the last 2 games, he was really good. He led the NFL in total QBR over the last 2 games. So I think that was evidence that he's going to get back to being Russell Wilson, and that what you saw for, when he got back was just residual effects of that finger injury.
So as you brought up our little quarterback exercise, and for people who weren't familiar with it on ESPN Plus, there's basically a quarterback trade simulator. Now, for people listening, I ended up with Derek Carr. So I got that deal done. Whether they can or not, I got it done. I tried to get Russell Wilson. I think my offer was 2 firsts and 2 seconds. Does that come close? And what else would it take? I mean, it didn't, because it didn't get it done. So how close could that get it?
Yeah. And your offer was, it might've been the strongest offer of any. I think there was 7 or 8 that came in for Wilson. Your offer and New Orleans offer, Mike Triplett made a pretty strong offer. I think he had a couple first round picks in there too. And you and I over the phone, we played GM over the phone.
Which was kind of fun.
It was, yeah. And I tried to squeeze a little bit more out of you, but I still don't think that, whatever we discussed, I think we discussed the possibility of, throwing Taylor Heineke in there. Yeah, as a bridge quarterback. I just still, even then, I don't think that gets it done. And again, it goes back to the question of, if you're the Seahawks, who's going to play quarterback for you? I don't think, somebody like Heineke, even if it was understood that he would be a bridge guy to the next franchise quarterback, I still wonder, would they look at it and say, how are you going to sell Taylor Heineke to the rest of your team and to your fan base? As good as he has been in that role, it very much remains to be seen if he is a long-term answer. And so I just think the Seahawks, they have always talked about, one of the repeated phrases that John Schneider always uses is talking about how they want to be a consistent championship caliber football team, which is his way of saying that they don't want to be the team that takes a step back in order to, maybe take 2 steps forward. He's talking about always wanting to be in the mix. And I just don't think you get there by, sacrificing a year with the bridge quarterback. And so what I think is I think it would take something in the neighborhood of 3 first-round picks, and more importantly, some sort of a viable path to a quarterback who can win them a championship. And it's just hard to imagine that guy being in this year's draft. And it's not like teams have that guy already on their roster that they're willing to trade. And so, another issue that I ran into in this exercise, John, is that, any team that Wilson goes to is probably going to make them a playoff team. Now, the Giants were involved in this exercise, and they might be the exception there just because they need a ton of work. But aside from the Giants, if you trade Wilson to Washington or to Cleveland or to New Orleans, that team is probably going to be a playoff team.
Right.
Meaning they're going to be picking in the late 20s next year. And
Right.
now all of a sudden, if you're the Seahawks and you didn't get that quarterback this year because it's a bad draft for quarterbacks, and you're putting your eggs in the basket of getting it next year, well, that's going to be hard too, because then you're picking in the late 20s. And, if there's 3 or 4 guys that you feel good about in that draft, they might be long gone by the time it's your turn to pick. And so it's just, you add it all up and you go through all the scenarios, and it's just hard to imagine a situation, at least with the offers that came about in this exercise. It was just impossible for me to see the Seahawks taking any of them.
And you even looking at like next year, if they got, let's say Washington gets in there in their 20s, they would still have their own pick, right? They still have their pick in 23. I guess you could package it, but it does make it harder. And it kind of relies on the Seahawks being really bad to be in a position to package something to move up for one of those guys, which could be a stronger class. But yeah, there's definitely more risk involved in that. So I didn't blame you for not taking it. And I think I was probably a little bit more generous on Derek Carr than people, but I think it was actually realistic based on what I heard. It was, I think, a first and a conditional 4 that could bump up to a 2. But that was based on people I talked to in the league as well. But I think Russell would be a guy that they would like here because he's from here. He could sell a rebrand, and they definitely need somebody that can go up there, but it's a steep price. It's a steep price to pay for any player, and especially with the money involved, what's it been like there for him? Because early on when he was there, you'd hear things about him in the locker room. It always seemed like you'd hear things about whether it's with Sherman or other guys, like how he was in the locker room. How's he viewed there within the team and all that?
Yeah, and that stuff was very real. Seth Wickersham, our colleague, wrote this fantastic piece about it in 2017. And I don't think that I know that everything in there was real, but I don't think that was necessarily a universal thought about Wilson. I think it was a handful of guys who felt really strongly about that. And there were other prominent players who I think, they didn't share those same views. And I've always thought, Sherman was definitely one of those guys that had animus towards Wilson. And there was other guys, I don't think KJ Wright ever really had an issue with Wilson. There were other players who came out and defended him. And I always thought it was interesting and maybe not coincidental that a lot of the guys who did not feel that way about Wilson had been in other places. Whereas the guys like Sherman and some of the other players, Doug Baldwin, it's pretty well documented that he and Wilson weren't the best of friends.
Right.
Those guys had only been in one locker room, and other guys had been in other places. And I think it's interesting that, maybe some of those other guys had been with other quarterbacks and had seen that, that's just kind of the way it is to some degree with quarterbacks in the NFL. They do get special treatment. They are kind of extensions of management in a way. And so I thought it was interesting that, the Michael Bennett's, Cliff Avrils, those guys weren't the guys who were sounding off about Wilson, and they had been in other places. And I think it's because they had seen that what's going on in Seattle, it's maybe not as abnormal as some of the homegrown guys had thought it was.
And then last thing, you are helping out with the Super Bowl coverage for ESPN. So you spent a lot of time covering the Rams. First of all, what's your general take on this game and this matchup?
Yeah, this is exactly what the Rams have been building for the last few years, and really this year in particular. You've heard the phrase, you've heard a lot of talk about the Rams going all in for 2021, and really they've sort of been going all in for a while. When you talk about all the first round picks they've traded, I think the last first round pick they made was when they drafted Jared Goff first overall in 2016. So that has kind of been the model for them the last few years, is trying to build up build a roster of star players to try to get people in LA, in that very competitive sports market in LA, where the Lakers have won all their championships, the Dodgers have won all their championships. There's like 10 plus pro sports teams plus, 2 major universities. I think it's really hard to compete in that LA landscape. And the Rams COO, Kevin Demoff, had some pretty honest comments about that, talking about how it's, they're really trying to play the long game, knowing that, as much as a Super Bowl win would help them in that regard, that it's not going to happen overnight. But certainly that has been part of their MO, is trying to sign and trade for star players who are going to get people in LA, a star town, to care about them. And I think that was especially true this year. And they really went all in this year. I mean, they don't have a first round pick until 2024 because of the Matt Stafford trade. They traded their second and third round pick for Von Miller. They've got all sorts of cap issues. I think they're currently projected to be like $8 million over the cap for next year. So it's going to make it hard to re-sign Odell Beckham Jr., Von Miller, Andrew Whitworth, their stud left tackle, has a huge cap number. So this is a team that is very much built to win right now. And I think the pressure is way more on them than it is on an up and coming team with a, second year quarterback, a bunch of other young star players in Cincinnati. And so that's just, in terms of matchups, I think the matchup is Aaron Donald and Von Miller versus an offensive line in Cincinnati that, at least on paper, looks like it's going to be pretty overmatched. But I think in the bigger picture, what's interesting to me is that this is going to be the Rams' best chance to win a Super Bowl in probably a long time. And it just so happens that they're doing it at home. They got a chance to do it at home in their $5 billion stadium. And so it's a fascinating storyline. But again, I think that's why the pressure is way more on the Rams in this game, for whatever that's worth.
And last thing with this too, the difference that Matthew Stafford has made, can you see it? You've covered the games against them. You've seen them out a few times. Compared to Jared Goff, how much difference has Stafford made?
Yeah, I don't have a great frame of reference for the Goff era, just other than when I saw him play the Seahawks. Right. But I think you see when the game's on the line, these 3 playoff games I've covered, 2 of them have been Stafford leading game-winning drives. The wild card victory over Arizona, that was a pretty stress-free win. But 42 seconds left against Tampa Bay, he leads them, with a couple big plays, a 50-plus yard throw, I think, to Cooper Kupp, and then in the NFC Championship game when they were down by, I think, 10 points in the fourth quarter. You see why Matthew Stafford, I think, since he entered the league in 2009, he's got the most fourth quarter or overtime comebacks in the NFL, and you just see some of the poise there. You see there's obviously the talent, him chucking the ball way downfield to Cooper Kupp in Tampa Bay. You just see the talent there, but you also just see the poise at the end of the game. And I don't know if I think that's one of many areas where he's an upgrade over Jared Goff.
Brady, have fun in LA. You can talk to Lindsay Theory, our Rams reporter. She's kind of gets off from our mock draft pick. She doesn't have to worry about that.
I know she hasn't had to worry for a few years. I'm kind of in that same boat too. I mean, the Seahawks, I think they've only made a couple over the last 5 years, and they didn't have one last year because of Adams trade. They won't have one this year because of the Adams trade, unless, of course, something happens with Russell Wilson. And in that case, you and I will be back on the phone.
Yeah, maybe you'll have the pick that I've done it every year. And I will say this, if they had listened to me, they'd probably be in better shape. So that's what I'll say. You can ask Nick Wagner how often I tell him that. So especially on some of the picks where I miss, where I'm like, you have choice between a couple of guys and I pick one and they pick the other. I'm like, they should have listened to me. They would have been better off. They don't listen.
Well, hopefully they listen, and maybe they listen to this podcast and they up their offer for Wilson. We'll see.
There you go. Brady, thanks a lot, man.
All right. Thanks, John. See you.